Wer oder was ist Europa? Wir kennen alle die Touristen aus Fernost, die mit einem Bus innerhalb von 7 Tagen 10 Länder bereisen und Unmengen von Fotos anfertigen. Wenn sie in ihre Heimat zurückkehren, ist Europa wahrscheinlich zu einem Erinnerungsklumpen zusammenkuriert. Ein Mix aus belgischen Pralinen und Pizza Napoli, Schwarzwalduhren und holländischen Kantinen. Und ich vermute, in mittlerweile zigtausenden japanischen Haushalten kleben Kühlschrankmagneten mit Michelangelos Motiv, wo Gott Adam mit ausgestreckten Zeigefinger Leben einhaucht. Doch das, was Europa ist, kann man nicht als Souvenir oder Fotomotiv sehen. Die vielen Sprachen, die Kulturen, die Religionsvielfalt ist das eine, aber auch die Geschichte, die Verschiebung der Grenzen, Flucht, Vertreibung. Europa ist eben kein Museum. Ein Museum präsentiert den konservierten Zustand, Europa verändert sich. Europa ist auch die Angst und Abschottung vor dem sogenannten Fremden. Und über diese Angst denkt die deutsche Essayistin Carolin Emcke sehr viel nach. Sie lebt und arbeitet in Berlin und gehört zu den wichtigsten Denkerinnen Deutschlands. Sie war als Reporterin in verschiedenen Kriegs- und Krisengebieten der Welt unterwegs und vielleicht betrachtet es sich aus dieser Perspektive deshalb besonders ergiebig über Europa. Herzlich willkommen, liebe Carolin. Leonidas Donskis ist aus der Republik Litauen zu uns gekommen. Er ist Autor von über 30 Büchern, die sich mit moderner Philosophie, Literatur und Politik beschäftigen und vor allem mit sehr vielen verschiedenen Kulturtheorien. So hat er eine Theorie der Zugehörigkeitskultur verfasst. Leonidas ist außerdem Mitglied des Europäischen Parlaments einer liberalen Partei. Herzlich willkommen, Leonidas. Auch bei Andrej Nicol Ljubić ist das Schreiben und die politische Arbeit untrennbar. Der Antikriegsaktivist, Menschenrechtler und Schriftsteller wuchs als Kind einer montenegrinisch-griechischen Familie in Sarajevo auf und lebt heute in Montenegro. Er engagiert sich als Berater für einen Politiker im montenegrinischen Parlament, aber er schreibt auch Romane, auf Deutsch erhältlich ist bislang Die Ankunft. Herzlich willkommen, Andrej. ist in Lyon in Frankreich geboren. Er hat jüdische Vorfahren aus Spanien, die dann wiederum ins türkische Edirne gegangen sind und von dort aus in die Schweiz. Demzufolge beherrscht Camille de Toledo sehr viele Sprachen und er sagt, und mein Vorname ist auch noch weiblich. Er schreibt Romane, unter anderem die Europäische Trilogie. Ein Band dieser Trilogie heißt Europäische Traurigkeit. Camille de Toledo hat die Europäische Gesellschaft der Autoren gegründet, deren Ziel in den Übersetzungen liegt. Überhaupt sagt Camille de Toledo, die Sprache Europas, jetzt weiß ich nicht, ob ich den Singular oder den Plural benutzen muss, die Sprache Europas ist die Übersetzung. Herzlich willkommen, Camille. Ágnes, ich hoffe, du verzeihst, dass ich dein Geburtsjahr nenne. Du bist 1929 in Budapest in Ungarn geboren und wir freuen uns wirklich sehr, dass du die beschwerliche Reise zu uns genommen hast. Du hast schon an der Europäischen Schriftstellerkonferenz 1988 teilgenommen und dort Folgendes gesagt. Der Mittelpunkt des Hellenismus war Griechenland. Die Texte, die man las, stammten von Homer und anderen griechischen Klassikern und wer nicht nackt Gymnastik treiben wollte, wurde für einen Barbaren gehalten. In ähnlicher Weise gilt als das europäische Zentrum europäischer Kultur Europa. Aber seit wann diskutiert man über europäische Kultur? Und wer diskutiert? Und in welcher Hinsicht wird über europäische Kultur diskutiert? So Ágnes vor 26 Jahren. Herzlich willkommen, Ágnes. Das Panel wird wieder moderiert von unserem Kollegen Tilman Spengler. Sie erinnern sich, der Sinologe aus Bayern, der mit Ágnes an dieser berühmten Konferenz 1988 teilnahm und einer damals noch vollkommen unbekannten Autorin, die aus dem rumänischen Banat kam, eine Jeanshose spendierte, weil sie eine brauchte. 24 Jahre später bekam diese Autorin den Nobelpreis für Literatur, und zwar für Deutschland. Ihr Name Hertha Müller. Alle 6 Autoren publizieren zudem in wichtigen Zeitungen und haben bedeutende Preise bekommen. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass Sie da sind. Ich wünsche Ihnen gute Gedanken und ein schönes Gespräch.
Meine Damen und Herren, die Tatsache, dass eine Stelle in einem bestimmten Jahr geboren wurde, was wir jetzt nicht wiederholen müssen, hat überhaupt nichts damit zu tun, dass wir sie in die Runde geladen haben, die über Museen spricht. Wir haben es vielleicht nur in einem ganz anderen Sinne gemacht, weil natürlich das Museum etwas ist, was nicht nur Gutes, sondern auch Schreckliches war. Und das wäre das zweite Thema Europa. Ich erkläre kurz, bevor ich Sie um die erste Frage stelle, ich erkläre Ihnen kurz, wie das Ganze, wie sozusagen die Thematik zustande gekommen ist. Ich war in China vor 2,5 Jahren bei einer dieser Veranstaltungen die Dinger heißen Think Tank. Und das Eigenartige eines Think Tanks ist, dass da nie was reingeht, aber viel rausgeht. Das ist ja auch der Sinn eines Panzerwagens wahrscheinlich. Und da ging es um Europa und dann sagte ein Funktionär, Europa, wissen Sie, das kommt mir vor wie die chinesische Mauer. Sehr alt, sehr brüchig und vielleicht nur für Touristen von Interesse. Und dieses im Ohr noch haben, dann dieses Hören erinnerte ich mich plötzlich daran, dass das Wort des Jahres 2004 oder beziehungsweise der Begriff des Jahres 2004 in Deutschland, die 4 Worte waren Old Europe, New Europe, deren Urheber, wenn ich mich recht entsinne, Donald Rumsfeld hieß und der damit etwas ganz Bestimmtes andeuten wollte und das führte sozusagen ein paar Jahre später direkt in die Thematik Freilichtmuseum. Das heißt, hat sich, wenn man denn überhaupt von einem Modell Europa sprechen kann, hat sich das überlebt. Und was hat sich überlebt? Und was gilt da als bemerkenswert, bedenkenswert und erinnernswert? Und das bringt mich sofort zu einer Stelle und meiner Frage, wenn Europa ein Museum wäre, was würden Sie dann suchen und was haben Sie dort gefunden?
Europe, a museum, that was the question. I answered this question, tried to answer this question in English. I'm sorry, but I can answer the questions also in German. When I heard this title, Europe as a museum, I was thinking about my own life. When I was a child, Europe was not a museum, it was a concentration camp. Europeans murdered circa 68 million other Europeans. Not to speak about non-Europeans they killed in the colonies. There were many millions refugees in Europe. They had neither passport nor country nor home. They were never nowhere welcome. That was the Europe of my childhood. And when I dreamt about something, I dreamt only about survival. Later on, when I was an adult under Soviet dictatorship, I was living not in a concentration camp, but I was living in a prison. In this prison, I had also dreams about Europe. These dreams were dreams about liberty, about political freedoms, about the possibility to express what I was thinking freely without being imprisoned or maybe even executed. This was the dream of Europe. There were no museums. But I was also dreaming about museums at the time of my youth. I was dreaming whether I will live the day to see once Firenze, for example, Santa Maria Novella, or enter a museum, for example, Uffizi, or the Louvre, when I will have the opportunity at all during my whole life to see a Museum. I can tell you, my dreams came true. This Europe is perhaps the Europe as a museum, I mean only the European Union of course, but certainly not a Europe of concentration camps, and certainly no more a Europe of prison. Whether we agree or disagree what's going on in Europe, whether we complain about the impossibility to realize the values Europe set for itself at the time when the European Union was established. In spite of everything, I have to tell you, my dream, it became true. I am here now in Berlin. I speak with you in Berlin. This Berlin used to be the capital of Nazi Germany. I stay here in East Berlin. This East Berlin used to be the capital of the Soviet DDR. And now I'm here in a free Berlin, where we can sit together with all other people from other countries and speak our mind freely and discuss with each other freely. In this way, my dream was realized. In addition, I could come with the night train from Budapest to Berlin without being vexed by at least six passport controllers and 6 officers of the customs service, as normally is the case. I could simply cross the borders. This is something. We have achieved something. And if we complain that the revolution, the great idea of the European Union had been betrayed, which might have been the case, I think that all dreams are betrayed, all revolutions are betrayed, because we have high ideas, high dreams for a while, and then comes everyday life, then comes normal life, and we cannot live up to those dreams. Europe is European museum. What is a museum? In a museum, you collect the past. That's why it's a museum, you collect the past. Now there are also museums of contemporary art, but if the contemporary art, when it gets to the museum, will become a past work because it has been created 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years ago. It's a past. Now the question is that such a big problem that the great European culture is not collected in museums? That would be only a problem if there were no creativity. But no creativity more in Europe. If the European spirit could not invent something new, something interesting for itself and for the world. I think European creativity is still alive. All those novelists who are here present testify for the liveliness of European creativity, so I'm not afraid that Europe is going to be a kind of museum. But in one way it did. Because you mentioned that novel, for example, is a European genre, but I don't think so. I think novel is a modern genre, and since Europe was the first modern state, novels were first created in Europe, and became the leading genre, one of the leading genres for 2.5 centuries. But now the whole world became modern, so in the whole world they create novels, they write novels, they are as good or as bad or as precious as the novels created in Europe. No, I mean only the Nobel Prize, which goes very frequently, Japanese, Indian, and Chinese, etc., Latin American novelists, who are very good, but I mean that we read their novels with great interest and with great enthusiasm, and they give us pleasure, and we are ready to interpret them. So this way, in this manner, this culture doesn't belong anymore to Europe because it became globalized. There are 2 things which became globalized. One thing which is globalized is entertainment. In all television sets all around the world you get the same entertainment. And the other which is globalized is in fact high culture. If you go to the different kind of contemporary art museums anywhere in the world, anywhere, any continent, you will basically meet the same kind of artistic imagination, the same type of compositions. Artworks became personal, but each and every artist has its own styles, there are no common styles in this way, but there are common genres everywhere. You see videos everywhere. Okay, if you see an exhibition from African art, then the videos, the faces will be blank. If you see the same video, for example, in Germany, most of the faces will be white, but doesn't make any difference. As far as the artwork is concerned, it is global. Culture became global. That was the only successful globalization, because economic globalization is not that successful. That was a successful globalization. But I come to the main point. The main point that democracy can become a museum. Because if democracy is a museum, that means that there is no innovation, that we do not overcome anymore what exists nowadays. So I come to the conclusion that it's no problem if artworks become museums, if the creative spirit remains alive. But it is a problem if democracy, democratic institutions become a museum, because they need always to fill with a new spirit. It's not just a question of creativity. It is the question that the population of European states, whether it has developed a spirit for democracy, a kind of democratic spirit. Because democracy, if it is taken for granted, then it is no more existent. So democracy cannot be taken for granted, because then it loses its validity, it loses its attraction. Then the institutions become empty. Once upon a time, and I finish now, Hegel said that the institutions become positive when the spirit is gone. So I think democratic institutions become positive, they still stand. But if the spirit is gone, they will become entirely fragile. And they can push down these buildings, these architectonic buildings of democracy. These institutions can be pushed down if the spirit is gone, if they remain only positive in character. So this, I would sum up, democracy should not become a museum. Okay.
Ich kann hier nur nebenbei und in geschweiften Klammern die Hoffnung ausdrücken, dass sich keine Museumsdirektoren im Publikum befinden, weil die könnten vielleicht auf den Gedanken kommen, dass ein Museum gar nicht so eine wichtige kulturelle Institution ist, wie sie es immer annehmen, sondern im Gegenteil etwas, oder wir sprechen nur von Freilichtmuseen an dieser Stelle. Der zweite Gedanke zum Thema Museum, der mir da noch gekommen ist, ist, dass natürlich das klassische europäische Museum sollte einmal das Altertum bewahren und zum Zweiten natürlich zeigen, dass sich Kriegsbeutezüge lohnen. Deswegen hat Napoleon ist eigentlich der Gründer des bürgerlichen Museums, und die Untertanen sollten auch wissen, dass sich die Steuergelder gut ausgezahlt haben unter dem Blutverlust, und deswegen kriegten sie den Louvre geöffnet. Das nur nebenbei zur Gesamtkomplexität. Darf ich noch persönlich hinzufügen, dass ich den Personen, die sich für die gute Sache einsetzen, mindestens so viel Energie wünsche, wie Sie hier an den Tag legen. Die Welt wäre eine bessere, hellere und Frau. Carolin,
the problem of sitting on a panel with Ágnes is that you only want to listen and don't want to talk. So if I overcome that shame, let me try to connect two things. I think one that Camille said and the other one that Leonidas said. The question of the people. When you talked, I wasn't quite sure I understood what you were saying when you said there isn't a European people anymore. And I think it had to do with the English term people that could mean the actual citizens, but it could also mean something like sovereignty. And I will try to answer to some of what you were saying by using the term sovereignty. And I think that connects to what Tilman is primarily pressing us on, we don't really answer, the question of democratic institutions and nation state. And I think what is at stake here at the moment, and at the moment means in Europe under these various threats that we see, and in times of globalization, is the core idea of democracy is self-determination. What is it? You know, the core understanding of what a democracy is about is that the people who are affected by a decision are able to participate in the processes that make that decision. Whether through representatives or not, doesn't matter, but it is the people who are affected by laws have to be included somehow. Now the problem of globalization is there are much more people affected by decisions and by policies and by laws than are actually allowed to participate. So that's, I think, what you also meant when you said the legitimacy question of the nation state. Is that, I mean, are there those people included in the discussions about the laws and policies that affect them? And the answer is no, at the moment, not. And that's, I mean, there's an existential moral democratic question that we have to face, and we don't have an answer to it, because we don't know what the instruments will be that can answer, whether they'll be more local or more international. I think that's one question. And I think what relates to Camille is that it's not only that problem, it's not only the problem that there are less people allowed to participate in the decision-making processes that affect them, but those that are allowed don't participate. And I think that is also what Ágnes, you know, was pleading for in the end, is those who are allowed to participate in these processes have to take their voices and speak for those who aren't. And I think that is, seems to me, the crucial question.
Yes, please, Leon.
Yeah, if I may say, yes, I agree with some of those points. I think they are very important. And I would like to say the following. Yes, well, I am very far from the idea that democracy will be taken for granted. I think that I never implied that. Of course, it's crucial, it's very important. But I would like to point out that it's not the only problem which we are facing now. Technocracy can parade as democracy. And there are many manifestations of technocracy which is manifesting itself as democracy. And I have to say that insensitivity, or what Zygmunt Bauman describes as adiaphora, we elaborated on that in our book Moral Blindness, is as dangerous as lack of democracy or as insufficient democracy. Adiaphora is a kind of withdrawal and return from human sensitivity. We know that Max Weber described this phenomenon when in public executions, it was not insane people gathering, it were perfectly sound people with the newborn babies, mothers, you know, sweet parents, and they celebrated public executions. But they would be scared to death to imagine themselves, their family members, on the scaffold. So that's why those realities can exist with no touch with one another. Sometimes we say that, well, Europe is very powerful because of its humanistic legacy. But Europe is Don Quixote. It's madness and humanism. Don Juan is about incessant change. It's moving from one object of infatuation to another. It's instability, it's inability to build connections, to build human bonds. But Don Quixote is about two forms of existence, madness and humanism. So that's why they would be absolutely parallel. And let me remind you, it's like Manichaean answers in Bulgakov or Czeslaw Milosz. Both believed that totalitarianism and major tragedies of Europe were possible because humanism or culture may play no role in political catastrophes. It disappears, it withdraws, then it can return. So that's why it's a very Manichaean age. And I'm just afraid that sometimes what happens is that we naively assume that education or culture can humanize the world almost immediately. No, we saw that Russian cultural masters signed the letter celebrating the invasion of Crimea. And we saw many things happen. And we know that history of Europe is full of examples like Knut Hamsun, Gabriele D'Annunzio, Umberto Boccioni, who were fascists or celebrating fascism, although very talented. So that's why I would say adiaphora or insensitivity or the refusal to take ethical choices, the refusal to be ethical and a propensity to be technical instead, it's a danger. Technocracy is a danger in the form of real politics. Realpolitik, what we call realpolitik, was never reconcilable to the ideals of Andrei Sakharov or Sergei Kovalyov. When 127 Tibetan monks burned themselves alive, do we react? When a tragedy happens, do we react? Because China is so important. It's so damn important for the EU. And the same applies to Russia. Happily now, we opened our eyes because we understood what Putin is all about. So meaning that insensitivity or technicality, technical mindedness, may go hand in hand with democratic rhetoric, with beautiful phrases about how wonderful democracy is. And I need something on the ground, and I would suggest that sensitivity, compassion, participation, empathy, empathizing with our fellow citizens, allowing them to speak. These are crucial lessons of democracy and empathy, without which we would end up in a totally senseless and technocratic world.
Wenn ich darf, Frau Emcke, könnten Sie den Gedanken aufnehmen, dass die demokratischen Institutionen einfach dringend einer fantasievollen Weiterentwicklung bedürfen, also die europäisch-demokratischen Institutionen, und in welche Richtung das gehen könnte. Aber Sie schauen ein bisschen...
Ich muss erst mal nachdenken. Ich gehöre zu den Menschen, die leider jetzt denken müssen, bevor sie sprechen können. Ich würde ganz gerne vielleicht versuchen, die Frage sozusagen insofern zu wenden, dass ich aufnehme das, was Ágnes gesagt hat, und versuche es zu verbinden mit dem, was wir vorher in den beiden Panels gehört haben. Es sind sehr, sehr viele wichtige Anregungen gekommen, auch in den vorherigen Panels, und ich würde ganz gerne, wenn ich darf, versuchen, die Bezüge herzustellen. Das eine ist, dass es mir so scheint, dass die Panels heute Morgen alle Sprecher und Sprecherinnen in ihren Nationalitäten und ihren Landschaften, aus denen sie kamen, verhaftet haben. Und die Frage der Identität wurde immer mit Rekurs auf kulturelle oder ethnische oder nationale Identität beantwortet, bis auf den Moment, in dem man Roma mit auf dem Podium saß. Deswegen würde ich ganz gerne Ihre Frage beantworten, indem ich an mir selber sozusagen auffächer, in wie vielen Identitäten ich diese Frage beantworten könnte. Ich könnte als Deutsche antworten, und dann würde ich sagen, dass was Ágnes mit dem Geist meint, der die demokratischen Institutionen füllen soll, durchgehen muss durch ein Erbe, das ich als Deutsche geerbt habe, als Deutsche, die keiner Familie angehört, die eine Verfolgungsgeschichte hat. Ich gehöre zu dem, was Jean Améry die Ungeprügelten nannte, oder was Primo Levi die Verschonten nannte. Und das heißt, als Deutsche, die an einer solchen Tagung teilnimmt, ist das, was ich erbe an Geschichten und Geschichte, immer eine aus Schuld und Scham. Und es ist eine, die Frage nach den demokratischen Institutionen in meiner gesamten Kindheit, in meiner gesamten Schulzeit, ich glaube auch in meiner gesamten Erwachsenenzeit, war die Frage, die mich mit diesem Erbe fokussiert hat. Eine Frage nach, was ist der Mensch und wie lässt sich nach diesem zivilisatorischen Bruch Vertrauen wiederherstellen. Und das Besondere ist, glaube ich, dass man als Deutsche die Frage des Vertrauens eben nicht stellt als, wie kann ich anderen vertrauen, was diejenigen geerbt haben, die eine Verfolgungsgeschichte und Geschichte von Opfern haben, sondern wie kann man uns jemals wieder vertrauen. Es ist, glaube ich, eine ganz spezifische Art, diese Geschichte anzunehmen. Als Seamus vorhin gesprochen hat über die Türkei und über das Verhältnis zu Armenien und natürlich auch nochmal die Kurdengeschichte, war mir das sehr vertraut. Also dass die Frage, wer man ist, immer auch beantwortet werden muss, auch die Frage, wer waren die anderen, die vor uns waren. Und bei dieser Frage würde ich sagen, und bei diesem Erbe und dieser Sprecherposition würde ich sagen, die bleibt. Und die vergeht nicht. Und ganz egal, wie viele heute in Deutschland gerne hätten, dass diese Frage vergeht, die vergeht nicht. Das Zweite ist, als Europäerin zu antworten. Und als Europäerin würde ich sagen, das, was ich damit als Geschichte oder als Geist für die demokratischen Institutionen gelernt habe, ist, als Europäerin verstehe ich mich als jemand, die in der Tradition steht von wechselseitiger Verwundbarkeit. Das ist, glaube ich, was wir alle geerbt haben, worüber wir, glaube ich, auch heute alle in den jeweils lokalen oder nationalen Geschichten gesprochen haben. Wir haben heute alle über unterschiedliche Arten von Verwundbarkeit im Verhältnis zu jemand anderem gesprochen. Und ich glaube, das kam mir ein bisschen zu kurz bislang. Ich glaube, als europäische Geschichte oder als Verständnis von dem, was das sozusagen europäische Schibbolett sein könnte, an dem sich scheidet, wer dazugehört und wer nicht dazugehört, sind es Kämpfe um Inklusion gewesen, es ist Revolution gewesen, es ist eine Geschichte, die sich auf Grundwerte, Menschenrechte und Bürgerrechte bezieht. Und ich glaube, diese Kämpfe um Inklusion sind diejenigen, die verhindern, dass es jemals zu einem Museum wird. Und das sind diejenigen, an denen sich beweist, ob eine demokratische Institution einfach nur erstarrt oder ob sie lebendig bleibt. Als drittes sitze ich aber auch hier als Homosexuelle. Es ist eine ganz andere Art von Bezugnahme auf Identität als all die vorher sozusagen thematisiert wurden. Ich kann aber nicht heute an einer Tagung über Europa teilnehmen, ohne das auch zu sagen. Hannah Arendt hat mal gesagt, man kann sich immer nur als das wehren, als was man auch angegriffen ist. Bei der Zunahme an Homophobie nicht nur in Osteuropa, sondern auch in Westeuropa werde ich sozusagen schwuler und lesbischer jeden Tag. Also auch da würde ich sagen, gibt es sozusagen ein Nachdenken über darum, wie demokratisch sind wir da eigentlich, und dann kann man es an verschiedenen Minderheiten festmachen, die sind aber eben nicht nur nationale. Und als allerletztes würde ich sagen, ich bin auch Autorin, ich bin Publizistin und sozusagen, wenn mich jetzt jemand normalerweise fragt, was ist Ihre Identität, würde ich sagen, ich hänge mit dem Leben am Wort. Ich glaube, dass man sozusagen Wortketten bildet und anderen etwas Sinnvolles mitteilen kann. Und da würde ich sagen, machen sich der demokratische Geist nicht nur daran fest, wie wir sozusagen das Erbe der verschiedenen europäischen Erzählungen antreten, sondern auch an der Frage, wie wir das Erbe und die Gegenwart der europäischen Tabus, des europäischen Schweigens, der europäischen Stummheit über unterschiedliche Konflikte angehen. Und das scheint mir auch nach dem, was wir heute Morgen sozusagen gehört haben und jetzt, dieselbe große Aufgabe von Ihnen zu sein, die genauso brennend ist, wie sie war.
Leonidas, Donskis, ich habe eine Frage, die eigentlich an Sie und Ihren Kollegen aus Frankreich gestellt wird, und das ist eine Frage, die sich ableitet ein wenig aus dem, was Frau Emcke gerade erzählt hat, weil das spielt ja bei der verschiedenen Identitätsfindung spielt der Staat eine gewisse Rolle, beziehungsweise das Herkunftsland. Und das führt uns ein wenig natürlich in diesem Kontext zu der nächsten Frage, was ist die Zukunft des Nationalstaates? Der Nationalstaat in einer gewissen Weise als Schutz, unser Kollege wirklich aus Montenegro hat sich sehr dafür eingesetzt, für die staatliche Souveränität oder Integrität seines Landes. Aber die Frage, für die anderen ist natürlich der Nationalstaat auch wieder verbunden mit den ganzen Adjektiven und Attributen der Nationalstaatlichkeit, die zur Abwehr führen, die zu Aggressivitäten führen, Aggressionen führen und so weiter und so weiter. Deswegen würde ich zunächst mal fragen, wenn Sie darüber nachdenken, was ist etwa so Ihre Perspektive, sowohl von Europa aus betrachtet, als auch von Ihrem Heimatland aus betrachtet, für die Zukunft des Nationalstaates?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. So I was preparing myself to tackle such a challenge as the soul of Europe, the character of Europe. I was preparing some metaphors like Don Quixote, Don Juan, but I see that I cannot escape my background as a Lithuanian and Eastern European who has to come up with some sort of explanation about the specificity of this yet another Europe. Okay, let me start with something intimate and something, I would say, quite open-minded. So following the example of my colleagues, I would say that there is something personal about every sort of reflection, of course. Being a Lithuanian of Jewish background, I understand quite well that this sort of identity parade in Europe is very far from innocent. On the one side, I realize that it's a very tricky moment. In Lithuania, I would pass probably for a Lithuanian-speaking Jew, or for a Jew of some sort of Lithuanian sensitivities. But I cannot pass for a Jew in Israel, because I am a son of a Holocaust survivor, but at the same time I have my mother, who is half Polish, half Jewish, and my maternal grandmother was Polish, which means that technically I wouldn't qualify for the club. I wouldn't pass for a Jew in Israel. So that's why I'm in a very happy situation. It's up to me to decide who I am. There is no institution in this world which would show the finger. Nothing and nobody can deny the identity that I adopt freely as a European. And I understand quite well that there is something that no nation state can control. There was an illusion at the beginning of the 20th century that the nation state was something beyond any kind of alternative. The nation state, on the one side, came from a very liberal impulse, because we know that in the 19th century, liberalism and nationalism were brothers, but only that their paths diverged greatly. Social Darwinism, radical forms of nationalism, racism, all of those things disfigured many manifestations of nationalism. But the nation state would have been unthinkable without anti-imperial forces. And the collapse of the Russian Empire, the collapse of Austro-Hungarian Empire, resulted in the proliferation of the new nation states and new actors on the political map of the world. And the same happened to the Baltic region, for instance. Whereas Lithuania was regarded as an old actor, so to say, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the common state with Poland, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, but some states were absolutely new, like Latvia, Estonia, Finland. And that's why I would say that on the one side, they represented a great chance for these nations, but in the case of my country, there was something quite ambivalent. On the one side, yes, Lithuania was to become a European state, but the price was immense. The country had to divorce the Polish culture. Because we know that the price were two competing nationalisms, Polish and Lithuanian, over Vilnius as a city. And Vilnius started losing its soul because it's always been Belarusian, Polish, Jewish. It was a very Jewish town. And Lithuanians were in minority after the Second World War. And the great paradox of history is that Lithuania, although it went through a great circle of abuse and calamities and exiles and anguish, but territorially it benefited. It got Vilnius from the Soviets, who liberated Vilnius from Poland, and then my hometown of Klaipėda, which was liberated from Germany. So to say, the cities that were unique in their multicultural, cosmopolitan character, they were regarded as the new Lithuanian acquisitions, which was a typical situation for many small countries. So the price was, I regard this as a very, very high price, that for what was regarded as national unity, safety, security, we had to pay the multicultural and very European character of our history. We simply can't. And that was a very, very high price. And that's why I would say that this is a very painful dilemma for many small European countries. On the one side, they cherish their multicultural history. On the other side, when it comes to something on the ground, they choose narrow-minded interpretations, they choose narrow-minded concept of solidarity. For instance, many people celebrate in Lithuania the unique character of Lithuanian legacy and Lithuanian, I would say, influences in Europe. I think everybody knows that this small country gave to the world Emmanuel Levinas, the greatest French moral philosopher of the 20th century, who was born in Kaunas, Lithuania. Or great Lithuanian Belarusian Jews, the Litvaks, Chaim Sutin, Pinkus Kalmen, Michel Kikwin. All of these wonderful people, they would have been unthinkable without Paris, Modigliani, those circles. This is celebration of diversity and multicultural past, but when it comes to something on the ground, something related to very concrete political decisions, we see pointless things. Now we're quarreling with Poland over nothing, for instance. It's a very strange thing which happened to us, that we're quarreling over W in Polish names. And many Lithuanians are outraged and think that this is the folly, the new form of madness of our politicians. But hopefully what's happening in Europe, I mean what's happening in Ukraine, and Russia would set a very important lesson for us how important our European solidarity is, and how it is pointless somehow to drop our European sensitivity and solidarity for nothing, for no reason. I would say that nationalism had a very curious history in the 19th and 20th century. It had its dark sides, needless to say. But let me answer the question, if you allow me just 1 minute, very briefly. The nation state. Yes, it was good. It was, I think, a symbol, a token of independence and liberty for small countries in the 20th century. They benefited, they became European actors, and I would celebrate this process. But of course, nationalism comes in many phases. It can be liberal, it can be very conservative, it can be very ugly and radical. We know it. The tragedy of nationalism was that whereas they were projecting the future of the nation almost for decades and centuries to come, we failed to understand that no state is in control of global processes. So that's why I am putting aside the question about global economic processes. But look, can we seriously believe that the nation state can manage global education, universities? Can we seriously believe that the nation state can manage academic and cultural forms of, our joint endeavor to create something? And the same counts for Europe. I deeply believe that translation, the art of translation, is one of the answers. Milan Kundera made a joke about the European Parliament, saying that all those interpreters that provide interpretation, and we have 28 languages, are more important than any MP, any member of the European Parliament. So that was his joke. I would add Umberto Eco as saying that Erasmus Mundus program seems to have been even more important than some economic processes of integration. So that's why the nation state could have a future in the European family. I would believe that they would delegate more and more powers to the European Union, provided the Union would be democratic. But I would say the problem lies that whereas the global field of power has real power, and at this point the nation state is impotent to compare to global forces, we understand that some universities in the world have such endowments that no small country could compare. For instance, my friend from Bologna University told me that the state of Montenegro cannot compete with the endowment of the University of Bologna. The state of Lithuania cannot compete with Harvard University in terms of endowment. So what are we talking about if we put aside this fact? Global field of influence and power is much more important than the nation state in terms of power. In terms of legitimacy, local and national forms of politics could be important. They could be still important. And this creates, and I'm finishing, the very discrepancy in our life. Every European politician now comes to his or her electorate and constituency with two stories, one for Europe, another for his country. They want to be elected, but how can they be elected if they choose to be liked or admired by local population? At the same time, they could be poked fun at if they appeared in Brussels or Strasbourg with their local stories. So that's why it's schizophrenia, and we have to do something about it. This is the real tension between the local and the global, and the nation state could be good for historical sentiment, for respect for the past, for explanation, interpretation of the past. It's not that awfully good when it comes to European processes, especially in culture and education.
Maybe I will go a little bit back. And when I came in, I heard that our vision here, and I would like to propose you a sort of maybe definition of the art object that we are here, or maybe Boris' voice would do it. As though it appears to me that we are, a dream in eine Deutsche Bank. Visit first I will start with the dream, and maybe we will move on in the discussion going towards the Deutsche Bank and the question of the EU and EU politics. I was very moved when I was listening to you, Ágnes, because, and I think you should, for this Geist, for this spirit, and in the in the coming elections, I think you should go in the streets and talk about it. And yeah, we should hear you more than Mr. Barroso. For me, right now, there is a lack of a European people. And this is what I understand when you say the spirit is gone. For me, right now, we're in a situation where, as writers, as artists, we carry a certain idea of Europe that does not correspond to Euroland and to Euro politics. As you said, and this is how I heard it, Geist is gone. And I was also going to speak about ein Unfall, an accident, which is always the image I keep of Walter Benjamin trying to cross the Pyrenees and dying at the border. And when I think about Europe, I think about Zweig, I think about Benjamin, I think about all this literature from the Mittel Europa. And then I start thinking about the politics of this literature. What were they standing for? And if I look at what is being done in the EU and Euroland, and this is where the betrayal starts. I would like to go with you through a certain amount of points that have been discussed by Mr. Barroso. First, we have in Germany, in France, laws who are supporting books and literature. He gives, in the negotiation with the United States, the idea that the book industry would be a normal product, and there would be free trade laws. And this would mean, if this was implemented, the destruction of all bookstores and the triumph of Amazon. So he alienated the literary community. Now I will talk about Schengen and Frontex. Schengen and Frontex, or Schengen, had a really sort of security term at the turning of the 20th and 21st century. And if we're speaking from the point of view of Benjamin, then this becomes just horrendous. The security term is just pushing the border of the Schengen space and delegating security questions, sometimes to private companies, sometimes even to southern countries. It's also, the everyday vision of les centres de rétention, retention centers, where the migrants is supposedly, regarded as unprepared. It's politics against gypsies. It's Manuel Valls making statements against the gypsy people as being sort of spontaneously, naturally delinquent. And I think we should be very aware of the fact that there has been a shift and a turn when we moved from the generation of the people, Kohl, Mitterrand, who had the sense of history and who bared the idea, because if we think about the European people, for the past 60 years, the European people has been phantoms. It has been the dead, the exterminated. It has been the Jews and the gypsies and the handicapped and the homosexuals. Those are the phantoms that we have tried to build the EU on. My question right now, at the turning point 20th and 21st century, is as this people of phantom, this ghost people, is in a way declining, because we're switching from a generation of the memory to a new generation of maybe more oblivion. Where is the people? How do you think of a European nation that would carry the Geist, that would change the way the politics is made? on migration, on culture, even on agriculture. Because, you know, when we hear that they're allowing transgenic seeds, yeah, in the EU, we're talking about something that is, you know, just giving the European market to the United States way of thinking about liberalism. And this is where, for me, this word, translation, is so important. First, because if you want the emergence of a nation, then you have to have a language. The horrendous figure of the nation, it's when it turns to identity. There's also a more generous way of thinking about the nation in 1848, for instance. It was about emancipation. Language was always at the center of the question of emancipation and nation affirmation. And right now, we're in a situation where we don't have a people. Therefore, we have gestionnaire, governance. They're governing in our name, or in the name of the ghosts. But they're just betraying the ghosts. And they're betraying every day the people. And when I say they, I know that within the European institutions, there are a lot of people who are convinced that things have to be changed. But the principle on which we have built the EU was all about free trade obsession. Free trade obsession. And no thought about common space and people. And when I go back to this word, and maybe we'll have more opportunities to think about it together, of translation, is, first, we're living in a post-colonial Europe, where people are from Asia, from Africa, you know, from all spaces, coming with their language, and therefore we're always in a translation question. And if we think about the common space to build, call it the nation, the European nation, a nation beyond nation. Then we have this meta-language, thanks to Umberto Eco. The only common language of Europe is translation. But because Umberto Eco was a bit lazy on that, he didn't give us, you know, the consequences. The consequences is to think about the politics of translation. Because it's not only, you know, saying, oh, we can translate more books. Or it's just, you know, us being, you know, with interpreters. It's actually thinking about the politics of translation in terms of genre, woman, man, in between genre, gender trouble, but also hybridization processes, mixing of cultures, that right now are just not accepted in Europe. And I really hope that, you know, the European elections will not see, you know, the triumph of another way of conceiving the European space, which is all about Christianity, identity, fear of migration, and then, end of the day, a sort of liberal dogma that is applying the same rule to all sorts of things, including books, culture, agriculture, which have to do with Bildung, school, and the way we eat. So, this is,
Das Thema Nationalstaat ist da noch nicht ganz erledigt. Und deswegen wende ich mich an unseren Kollegen Nicolaidis. Haben Sie einen letzten Aufruf zur Verteidigung des Nationalstaates oder zu seiner Weiterentwicklung oder zu seiner Abschaffung nicht notwendig im marxistischen Sinne gemeint?
Yes, I was very active in let's say, creating a national independent state of Montenegro. But look, I was young and stupid, I can be excused for that. I certainly hope so. First of all, I find it fascinating that we are here talking about future in the Deutsche Bank Forum. It is fascinating because if people from Deutsche Bank don't know what the future of the EU is, how the hell should I know? Actually, I was hoping that someone from the bank would come here and explain to us.
He knows.
What's really going on in Europe?
Very well.
I think the point is that we offer different answers.
Then I wanted to say that I at some point realized that when I speak in my native language and when I speak in English, I have another opinion, you know. Because when I speak in English, I always stand for the thing I'm actually able to say. In order to avoid that, I wrote a little text, you know, because that's what we writers do. Okay. Then I shorten it up, and I would like to read just a short part of it, because you know how they say it's shame to waste food, and it's shame to waste text too. It seems to me that the people outside of Europe doesn't have a problem to define what Europe is. For us from the periphery, Europe is European values, because it definitely is not about the power of arms, Russia have more of it, and it's not about money, USA have more of it, and it's not about fast growing, China is better in that. But the problem is that it seems that by European values, we outsiders and you Europeans mean a different thing. Hegel wrote that the secret of the ancient Egyptians were a secret to the ancient Egyptians too. So maybe we should rephrase Hegel's notion, and European values are a secret to the Europeans too. Anyway, it seems to me that we are all trying to recall, reanimate the values which made Europe so great. Let me be cheesy on this one. Like a lighthouse of hope for all the humanity. Even if we don't know what Europe should be, we can be sure what it should not be. A museum of abandoned European values. A conference named Is the EU Dead? Gianni Vattimo was a keynote speaker. We participants of the conference held in Teatro Metastasio all agreed. The answer is yes. Waiters in cafe, receptioners in hotel, and ticket sellers in theater agreed too. Actually, all the citizens of Prato I talked to firmly believed that the final countdown for the doom of the EU began. The morning after the conference, I woke up early and took a walk. Prato was free of people, therefore irresistible. It was a cold morning, even Toscana can be cruel in February, but I had my coffee outside of cafe so I can smoke. I was thinking about how the smoking ban is a treason of Western values. If our civilization was good at something, it was killing people. Smoking kills, of course, but so does the state. In smoking ban, I see a tendency of state to monopolize the right to legal kill. I remember I thought that morning. Then came the African. He was carrying a few lighters, a plastic watch, and 3 Snickers bar, offering them to buyers. He tried to sell me his goods in Italian, and he was really happy when I said no and offered him coffee instead in English. Hello, brother. Where are you from? Montenegro. Where is that? What brings you to Prato? He agreed that Europe has no future too. Don't be confused by the fact that I'm a well-educated man, he said to me. He was a magister of electrician engineering. He left Nigeria after his parents were killed. He was talking about equilibrium and disbalance, about Emmanuel Wallerstein's notion of world system, about weak integrative forces of EU. Are you sure you don't need a lighter? I was sure. Then he said, enough of the chit-chat, I have a business to do, and he left. During the day, immigrants from Africa are walking on the streets of Prato, selling frippery. When the night comes, they go to cafes and restaurants selling roses to couples in love. 1 rose, 2 euros. Well, I'm not a bleeding heart, never was accused of that. But one could cry his heart out watching tired Africans wandering through the Toscana piazzas, selling worthless goods. For God's sake, what does European right-wingers mean claiming immigrants are a danger to European culture? Those people in Prato with lighters and roses in hands are just walking through the culture, like through the open-air museum, never intervene in culture, till the day they are deported back to their homeland. The same day, Predrag Matvejević, a wonderful Yugoslav leftist intellectual, told me, you know, I peeked in the cathedral. A priest from Africa was holding a mass. It brings hope. Matvejevic is a good man. Good man tends to see hope in everything. For straight 43 years, the left was winning all the elections in Prato. Then Berlusconi won. He won because of fear. We all know how it goes. Left is winning because of hope, right is winning because of fear. Citizens of Prato were afraid of Chinese. They told us that 10,000 of them came to the city, and of course they were afraid of Africans. After the Berlusconi won, they banned all the non-Italian restaurants from the city center. Indeed, terrifying is Indian food like a grisly army with its banners, and God forbid us from horrors of kebab. If God wants, the government will. So, are European values universal, or they are reserved only for the Europeans? If second is the answer, Europe is more like a gentleman's club. If second is the answer, why should anybody care? But it is not. With its faith in human potential, with its emancipatory politics, its writers, thinkers, artists, film directors, Europe was and still illuminates. That's the good news. The bad news is that the light of the dying star can be seen even after its death. So that was it.
Ganz herzlichen Dank auch für diese konzise Form. Ich glaube, es gibt kaum Anhänger hier, oder ich habe es den Beifall vielleicht richtig angehört, dass es kaum Anhänger des Schengen, der Praxis der Abschiebung oder der Abschottung in Europa gibt. Es gibt kaum Anhänger, glaube ich, eines künftigen Freihandelsabkommens mit den Vereinigten Staaten. Es gibt kaum, unter das ja dann auch die Buchpreisbindung fallen würde, vermutlich. Und es gibt sicherlich keine richtig fanatischen Anhänger der Herren Berlusconi oder Barroso in diesem Raum, obwohl es natürlich Europäer sind. Wir dürfen ja nicht die Europäer uns sozusagen so hinstrecken, wie wir sie gerne hätten, und dasselbe Problem hatten wir bei den Werten, und das hat uns ja auch Frau Heller gelehrt, als sie sagte, wie sieht mein Museum aus, und das war mal von einem Herrn Hitler oder von irgendwelchen anderen finsteren Gestalten bevölkert. Ich bin sehr hin und her gerissen. Ich würde gerne eine zweite Runde machen, habe dazu noch 25 Minuten Zeit. Das heißt, dass das Publikum die Klappe halten müsste. Das finde ich auch nicht gut.
It will be short.
Be short, precise, but you are the only place. No, you are the only one, but we love to listen to you. Let's put it that way.
I think it was a very interesting session. A lot of interesting things have been said here which we need to reflect upon. I think, for example, the problem between faith and trust was a very important issue. Because obviously in democracy we don't need to believe in a democracy, we have to have trust in a democracy. It's totally different thing, it's a very important issue. It's also a very important issue about nation state. Simply, we are humans, fragile creatures. We have the need to say we. The question is, what is the we? Now, there were times when we were Christians, we were white people as against the colored people, or we were the cultured people as against the uncultivated. We were the people of technological progress and others were regress. Now, we are nation state. That's also a kind of we. The problem is not that we need a we because we need a we. Maybe I do not need it, but even I do need it in a way. You need certain kind of community to which you belong. It doesn't need to be a soccer community, soccer team, but something a little bit broader than this. Some people, the soccer team, that's we enough, or a golf team, but little bit. The problem of nation state is not that we have an identity. The problem is that this kind of nation state identity is very bad at integration. That this nation state, the ideology of nation state, nationalism you mentioned, it does not allow for integration. Either assimilation, either you assimilate others or you push them out. Yeah? They are pushed out, they don't belong to us, they are strangers, aliens. forget them, or they must assimilate, speak our language, take our customs, not to speak their mother tongue, etc., etc. So total assimilation. That's not so in the New World. In America, you do not need to assimilate, you can integrate. In the democracy, that's why we have a greater trust in United States democracy than in European democracies, because of the happy situation that we have nation state. No, but of course, every gain is also a loss. So you can say nation states are a gain or a loss. You cannot answer this question because they are both. Now, how can you compare loss and gain? It's very difficult to compare them because they cannot be quantified. And what is gain for one is loss for the other. So it's very difficult to tell it. I think the only thing that we can do optimally to maximize the gain and minimize the loss. But we cannot eliminate the loss. So much so about betrayal. We cannot eliminate the loss. And the last thing I want to say, we live in dangerous times. We should not forget it. We live in dangerous times. The world was always a dangerous place. There were certain illusions after the collapse of the Soviet Union that the world ceases to be a dangerous place. But no, it did not cease to be a dangerous place. We have to confront this. We have to have a dual, I think that's a bad bit. Okay, that's an identity. I'm sorry about the name. So I think that there is a double thing. The one is to reflect on our past, then I use the we, on the past of Europe, on the problems in the European past. Be sincere about it, sincere about the past, sincere about the narratives about the past, or different narratives. We can deal with certain narratives critically. You don't need to accept European narrative as they are. So we can create new narratives which include a reflection upon the old ones and critique of the old ones. That is perhaps possible. That is perhaps possible. This is the thing we Europeans can do. The other things we can do is, I said, maximize the gains and minimize the losses, and be aware of the world as a dangerous place. Don't have illusions. Don't have illusions from you. This belongs to the spirit. Because if the spirit of democracy is gone, democracy will be absolutely defenseless. Defenseless against all dangers. Because we don't defend ourselves, everything is taken for granted, goes on itself. So it is an elementary interest of Europeans to feel this dead body with a kind of spirit, to rejuvenate, return to the beginnings, because otherwise we cannot resist the dangers of this world, which are before our doors. Because the extremist parties are here in Europe, the Nazi parties among them, they are within our doors in a way. So I think it's better to be aware of it than to fight against the dangers inside and outside. You need the spirit of democracy, otherwise we are going to lose. And this is maybe a pessimistic thing, but it's not out of passion. Nothing is sure and nothing is guaranteed. Future is never guaranteed.
Danke Ihnen sehr, Frau Heller.